Chapter 39. After breakfast, Xianxia and Tai Ta continued on their journey with their weapons in hand. However, a petite figure followed closely behind them. It was Xianxia. Xianxia was empty-handed as she stared around cautiously. She had lost her weapon when she fled the previous day. Tai Ta carried his axe. He had already changed his clothes. They were made from a piece of azure wolf hide that had been sewn together with grass roots. His original uniform had become tattered after the battle with the azure wolf the previous night. In the blink of an eye, another day had passed. Although Xianxia and Tai Ta's harvest was not as good as the first day, it was still quite good. They had killed over 70 magical beasts in total, which made Xianxia extremely envious. Xianxia had changed a lot during the day. She had become much tougher after the attack from the azure wolf the previous night. At the very least, she no longer cried out in fear when she saw magical beasts. Moreover, as the magical beasts died one after another at the hands of Xianxia and Tai Ta, Xianxia had developed a certain level of immunity to the bloody scene. She gradually adapted to it. Moreover, she had actually learned quite a lot from Xianxia and Tai Ta about surviving in the forest, as well as her ability to predict danger. Her talent and ability to learn amazed Xianxia. Xianxia had already guessed that if Xianxia maintained this state, her future achievements would definitely not be too low. Of course, the most important factor was her talent in cultivation. After all, on the Tianyuan continent, where the strong reigned supreme, one's own strength was the ruler of everything. Xianxia was extremely smart. Although she did not do much during the day, she did not cause any trouble for Xianxia and Tai Ta. She also did not become a burden to them like Xianxia and Tai Ta had imagined. Whenever the two of them fought against magical beasts, she would always watch from afar. After a day, both Xianxia and Tai Ta had a whole new level of respect for Xianxia. They no longer looked down on her like before. In the evening, Xianxia and the other two sat by the fire, roasting a large piece of magical beast meat. "Seniors, have you really not condensed a saint weapon and become a saint?" Xianxia stared at Xianxia and Tai Ta with her bright eyes and asked curiously. After a day of running around, Xianxia's clothes had a few holes. These were all scratched by the thorns and branches in the forest. Her small face had completely become a dirty little cat. In this forest without water, they had to rely on the blood of magical beasts to quench their thirst. Xianxia had no way to wash the dirt off her face. "If we had a saint weapon, why would we use this broken axe?" Tai Ta looked at the axe that had curled up and had many nicks on it and complained. After continuously being chopped by Tai Ta's abnormal strength, even the axe was a little unable to withstand the extreme. The axe was no longer as sharp as before. Even the originally sharp tip of Xianxia's rusty iron rod was almost worn flat. Xianxia looked at Tai Ta and Xianxia with a face full of admiration. "You two are really amazing. You can kill a first-rank magical beast so easily before becoming a saint. In my opinion, when you two become saints, you will probably be able to fight a second-rank magical beast alone." Xianxia disagreed and said, "How could it be that easy? These magical beasts were all raised by the Academy. They belong to the category of magical beasts that do not have any offensive abilities. That's why it was so easy for us to kill them. Once we encounter magical beasts with strong offensive abilities, it will be very difficult for us to kill them." Hearing this, Xianxia nodded seriously and said, "That's right. I've heard my father say before that some of the more powerful first-rank magical beasts can already spit out low-level magic. Their destructive power is very strong. Some ordinary saints are not their opponents." Xianxia looked at Tai Ta, who was staring blankly at the dancing flames, and said, "Tai Ta, the second area is no longer a challenge to us. I want to go to the third area tomorrow. What are your plans?" Tai Ta thought for a moment when he heard that. "That's right. I can already easily deal with the magical beasts in the second area. They are indeed no challenge to us. All right, Changyang Shoten, I'll go to the third area with you and see just how powerful the second-rank magical beasts there are." Hearing their conversation, Xiao's expression changed slightly. "No way, the two of you haven't even reached the Saint Realm, yet you want to hunt Class 2 magical beasts in the third region? Although the two of you are very strong, Class 2 magical beasts are much more powerful than Class 1 magical beasts. Without a saint weapon, you might not be able to deal with them. Moreover, the fur of Class 2 magical beasts is much thicker than that of Class 1 magical beasts, and their defense is very strong. With your broken axe and rusty iron rod, it would be very difficult to injure them, let alone kill them. Moreover, I heard that the environment in the third region is much worse than here. There are poisonous insects and snakes everywhere, and there are also swamps. The slightest carelessness will cause you to lose your life. It is very dangerous, so I don't recommend you to go to the third region. Tai Ta looked at his and Jianxin's weapons when he heard that. He said bitterly, "Yeah, Changyang Shoten, after 2 days of fighting, my axe is no longer as sharp as before. Even your weapon has become blunt. It'll probably be very difficult to kill second-rank magical beasts." Jianxin smiled and said, "There's no rush. I think there are still quite a few students in the second area. The reason why we haven't met them yet is because we've already left them far behind. We'll head back tomorrow and use our monster cores to trade for weapons. I'm sure they'll be very happy." "Yeah, that's a good idea." Tai Ta nodded in agreement. Jianxin continued, "Liang Xiaola, let's split up tomorrow. You should be able to make it through the last day safely with the other students. After all, those who can last 2 days here all have some real ability." Liang Xiaola nodded and said nothing. She was clearly rather dejected right now. After all, she knew how dangerous the third area was. It was still very difficult to say whether Jianxin and Tai Ta could deal with the magical beasts. If she insisted on following them, Jianxin and Tai Ta would not agree to it. Even if she really did follow them, she would only become a burden for them to retreat. The night passed very quickly without any incident. When the sky had just turned gray, Jianxin and Tai Ta finished cultivating for the night and began to prepare breakfast. Only after the three of them had breakfast did the sun slowly rise from the horizon. Afterward, Jianxin and the other two continued on their journey. However, they headed back this time. After 2 days of battle, the two of them had become much more vigilant against danger, so they returned extremely quickly. Under a large tree, 9 students in tattered clothes were sitting powerlessly, panting heavily. They were a combination of commoners and nobles, but at this moment, all 9 of them were in tattered clothes, with many dried bloodstains on them, and all of them were wounded. Not far from them, there was a corpse of a magical beast lying on the ground. "Everyone hold on. This is already the last day. After today, we'll be able to leave," a commoner student said as he panted slightly. "It's a pity that we don't have enough magic cores. We're still missing 5. It seems that we still need to hunt 5 more magical beasts," said a young man who was born in a noble family. Originally, these aristocratic children disdained to stay with these commoner students, but after they saw those ferocious magical beasts, they were all scared out of their wits. At this critical moment of life and death, who would care about the issue of one's identity? Protecting one's own life was the most important thing. Therefore, those aristocratic children gradually walked together with the commoner students. After all, many people understood the principle of strength in numbers. Moreover, these commoner students might have grown up in a harsh environment, but when faced with those ferocious magical beasts, they actually didn't cower in the slightest. This made those aristocratic children who had always looked down on them look at them in a new light for the first time. Gradually, everyone gradually became friends. Moreover, as they continued to fight with the magical beasts, the 9 of them became more and more familiar with each other. In the end, they actually formed a rare contract, which caused the 9 of them to become more and more harmonious. At this moment, a trace of movement suddenly came from the weeds in the distance. "Everyone be careful, there's a magical beast attack." A person who reacted quickly immediately shouted. Immediately, the 9 of them stood up from the ground and vigilantly stared at the direction of the strange movement. As the weeds swayed more and more violently, finally, a burly man dressed in animal skin appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Just as the burly man in animal skin appeared in front of everyone's eyes, 2 more figures walked out from behind him. Although their clothes were tattered, they still wore the uniform of Kargath Academy. Perhaps because they had been shuttling through the weeds for a long time, the three people's faces were all black. There were still some broken pieces of grass on their heads. Only their facial features could be seen. Their appearance was already very unrecognizable. Seeing that it was humans and not magical beasts that appeared in front of them, the 9 students immediately let out a sigh of relief. Then, a trace of a happy smile appeared on their faces. At a time like this, if a few more people could join them, it would directly increase their overall strength. It would also be much easier to hunt magical beasts. Moreover, they were not stupid. They all understood that the people who could survive until the 3rd day were definitely not weak. These 3 people were Xianxia, Tower, and Xianxia. After rushing back for half a day, they finally discovered a group of people. As it was already the last day of the 3-day period, there were not many people who continued to stay in the forest. Most people had already directly given up and left, so there were very few students who remained in the forest now. At this moment, when Xianxia's gaze landed on a beautiful girl in the group of 9, his face immediately revealed an expression of pleasant surprise. "Ah, Lisa." Xianxia's face was filled with excitement. After letting out a cry of pleasant surprise, he immediately ran towards the beautiful girl as if he was flying. Hearing this somewhat familiar voice, the young girl blinked her big bright eyes. She suspiciously stared at Xianxia, who was dashing towards her. However, at this moment, Xianxia's small face was blurry and looked like a little tabby cat. Even if this girl called Lisa was very familiar with her, it was still very difficult to recognize Xianxia from her appearance. Xianxia rushed in front of the girl and opened his arms to hug her tightly with an excited expression. His voice was filled with joy. "Lisa, I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you had already left." Chapter 40. "That's right, Lisa. I'm Xiaola." Xianxia's voice was filled with excitement. "Xiaola, it really is you. That's great. I thought you'd left already. I never thought I'd be able to see you here." After confirming Xiao's identity, the girl called Lisa was also overjoyed. She hugged Xiaola excitedly. At this time, an extremely wretched-looking young man walked in front of Xiaola and the girl who were hugging each other. He said with a smile, "Xiaola, I didn't expect that we would meet again in the forest after being separated. This really makes me feel very happy." "Hello, I'm very happy to meet you here. I wonder if you're willing to join our team. I believe that with your addition, our team will become even stronger, and it'll be easier for us to hunt magical beasts. Moreover, we'll be able to look after each other in this forest that's fraught with danger." At this moment, a young man in the same tattered clothes arrived before Xianxia and Lisa as he spoke in a pleasant tone. However, when he saw Xianxin's blood-soaked uniform, he could not help but reveal a sliver of surprise. He did not believe that the blood came from Xianxin's body. Otherwise, if a person lost so much blood, they would have become extremely weak already. It would be impossible for them to remain standing there with such a steady expression and such a sharp gaze. Xianxia shook his head slightly and declined politely, "Sorry, we're planning to leave, so we can't stay with everyone." Hearing that, a sliver of regret appeared in the young man's eyes. However, he still tried to persuade them, "Fellow students, although the magical beasts here are far too powerful, we have the advantage in numbers. As long as we work together, even if we encounter 2 magical beasts at the same time, they won't pose a threat to us. I'm sure we'll be able to gather the 2 Class 1 monster cores that each of you handed in very quickly." The young man still refused to give up. He had a good eye. He could tell that Xianxia and Tai Ta were quite powerful. "That can't be helped. The 2 of us have already decided to leave this place, so we can't be with everyone. Please forgive us." Xianxin's tone was very amiable. Hearing that Xianxia and Tai Ta wanted to leave, the young man couldn't help but reveal a trace of regret in his eyes. He simply couldn't understand. There was only 1 day left before the 3-day deadline. As long as they paid 2 Grade 1 monster cores, they would be able to pass. Yet, at this time, Xianxia and Tai Ta actually wanted to leave. Could it be that they wanted to give up on this opportunity? The young man thought that Xianxia had given up on leaving the forest. He would never have thought that what Xianxia were talking about was actually leaving the 2nd area to go to the 3rd area, and not leaving the forest. At this moment, Tower's gaze landed on the giant axe in the hands of a burly student. His eyes immediately lit up with joy. He then walked up to the burly student and said in a low, muffled voice, "Hey, I'll give you 2 Tier 1 magic cores. Why don't you exchange your axe with mine?" As he said that, Tai Ta removed the axe from his back, while his other hand pulled out the 2 blood-stained Grade 1 monster cores from his space belt. At this moment, everyone was shocked to discover that the giant axe in Tower's hand was stained with blood. The entire surface of the axe was dyed red with blood. It looked extremely frightening, as though it had drunk countless amounts of blood. What made everyone feel even more incredulous was that this axe, which was made entirely out of iron and was no weaker than steel, was already riddled with holes. Moreover, some parts of the axe had even curled up. Seeing this scene, most people were in disbelief. Almost all of them believed that when Tai Ta chose his weapon back then, the weapon was already in this shape. They simply couldn't believe that Tai Ta had completely chopped the axe into this shape. The burly student stared blankly at the blood-red axe in front of him that was riddled with holes, as if it was condensed from blood. He was at a loss for what to do. When the other students heard Tai Ta's request, their eyes immediately lit up. They looked at the burly student with envy, as if they couldn't wait to exchange their weapons with Tai Ta. "Fellow student, I'll use the sword in my hand to trade with you." A student holding a giant sword came in front of Tai Ta and said with a smile. Hearing this, Tai Ta looked at the huge sword in the student's hand, then shook his head and said, "No, I still prefer using axes." Hearing this, the student's face was filled with disappointment. At this time, the 2 Class 1 monster cores were more important than anything else. Not to mention him, if it was possible, even the other students would be willing to exchange their weapons with Tai Ta for the 2 Class 1 monster cores. Even if their weapons were more valuable than the 2 Class 1 monster cores, they wouldn't hesitate. The burly student wasn't stupid. After being stunned for a moment, he immediately exchanged the axe in his hand with Tai Ta with a face full of joy. Who wouldn't be willing to do such a profitable trade? After Tai Ta used 2 Class 1 monster cores to exchange for an axe, everyone immediately looked at Tai Ta in a different light. Some of the smarter people had even linked the axe to Tai Ta's current state. From this point alone, it was enough to prove Tai Ta's extraordinary strength. Otherwise, how could he casually take out 2 Class 1 monster cores? After all, this wasn't the outside world. Before coming to the forest, the academy had already taken away all the storage devices of the students. Even their bodies had been carefully searched. It was impossible to bring in a monster core from the outside world. There was only one way to obtain a monster core here, and that was to hunt magical beasts. However, there was still one thing that everyone couldn't understand. Since Tai Ta and Xianxia had the strength to hunt magical beasts, why did they leave before 3 days had passed? After all, the Academy's rules stated that they had to survive in the forest for 3 days and hand over 2 Class 1 monster cores to pass. Both were indispensable. Could it be that he doesn't care about the reward at all? Or was he just lying to us when he said he was leaving? Is it really because he doesn't want to hunt magical beasts with us? Everyone could not help but think like that. As soon as they thought of that, some people immediately looked at Xianxia and Tai Ta with dissatisfaction. Xianxia did not care about everyone's expressions. He looked at Xianxia, who was hugging another girl, and said, "Xianxia, since you've found your friends, why don't you stay with them? It'll be better if there's more people." Xianxia slowly separated from the girl. She glanced back at Xianxia and Tai Ta before nodding gently, "Then be careful." Afterwards, Xianxia and Tai Ta didn't stay any longer. They directly left. Once the two of them had left, the girl called Lisa asked with some dissatisfaction, "Xiaola, who are they? Why are they so arrogant, refusing to stay with us?" "Lisa, you've misunderstood them. It's not that they don't want to stay with us. They really do want to leave," Xiaola explained. "That can't be." Lisa's face was filled with disbelief. "Lisa, seeing that they can casually take out a Class 1 magic core, this means that the two of them already have the strength to kill a Class 1 magic beast. Moreover, they just used 2 Class 1 magic cores to exchange for weapons with us. This action clearly shows that they want to continue fighting. How could they possibly leave this place? That's right. Xiaola, you've probably been tricked by them, a young man added from the side. Xiaola smiled. They do want to leave, but they didn't explain it clearly to you. They want to leave the second region and head to the third region to hunt Class 2 magical beasts. What? Xiaola, are you kidding me? They want to head to the third region to hunt Class 2 magical beasts? How could that be possible? Could it be that they've attained the Saint Realm? But that doesn't make sense. If they possess the strength of a Saint Realm expert, then why would they exchange weapons with us? The two of them are really courting death. They actually want to head to the third region. They're purely courting death. As soon as Xiaola finished speaking, it caused the others to discuss animatedly. Without exception, no one felt that Xianxia and Tai Ta would be able to survive in the third region. Lisa held Xiaola's hand and asked with a tone of obvious disbelief, Xiaola, they wouldn't really go mad and head to the third region, right? Xiaola nodded. Exactly. They really do intend to head to the third region. Lisa, you must not underestimate them. They're actually very formidable. Xiaola had a serious expression on his face. Could it be that they've attained the Saint Realm? Lisa spoke with surprise. The Academy had clearly stated that those who had attained the Saint Realm had to head to the third region. It was utterly impossible for them to appear in the second region. Xiaola shook his head. No, they haven't attained the Saint Realm because they haven't condensed a Saint weapon at all. The surprise in Lisa's eyes grew when she heard this. It was already extremely difficult for those below the Saint Realm to survive in the second region, let alone the third region. After all, the magical beasts in the third region were all Class 2 magical beasts, and they were much stronger than the Class 1 magical beasts in the second region. The two regions couldn't be compared at all. Even those who'd condensed a Saint weapon and attained the strength of a Saint Realm expert would find it extremely difficult to kill a Class 2 magical beast. It required a few people to join forces to deal with one. Lisa was a very good friend of Xiaola, so Xiaola didn't hide anything from her. He lowered his voice and said, Lisa, let me tell you. Yesterday, I saw the two of them kill over 70 magical beasts in a short period of a day. Lisa turned pale with fright when she heard this, and she exclaimed, What? Xiaola, you're not joking, right? The two of them killed over 70 magical beasts in a single day. Lisa was extremely shocked. She didn't suppress her voice at all, and when she finished speaking, her voice grew louder and louder. As a result, the other 8 people heard her clearly. Immediately, everyone's expressions changed, and they quickly thought of Xianxia and Wuxia who came with Xiaola, and then they all revealed expressions of disbelief. Lisa, what are you talking about? The two of them killed over 70 Class 1 magical beasts in a single day. A young man asked. He didn't believe that the two of them referred to Xianxia and Wuxia who they'd just met. Chapter 41. No way, Xiaola, aren't you exaggerating a little too much? Two people who aren't even saints actually have the ability to kill over 70 magical beasts in a single day? How is that possible? A young man holding a spear said in disbelief. Yeah, that's too much. Let alone a saint, I don't think even a great saint would be able to kill over 70 Class 1 magical beasts in a single day. They'd probably die of exhaustion halfway through. I don't believe that their saint force is limitless. The one who spoke was a young girl with a longbow. Her voice was very pleasant to the ears. At this moment, the young man who had invited Xianxia and Tai Ta to join their group suddenly asked, Xiaola, do you know who those two are? When did such powerful people appear in our Kargath Academy? They're not even saints yet, but they can easily kill magical beasts of the first order. As soon as he finished speaking, the young man seemed to have thought of something and his expression changed slightly. Xiaola's face was filled with pride as if he had done something glorious. He said leisurely, I can tell you. Actually, the big guy who exchanged axes with you is the famous Tai Ta in the academy. He's the direct disciple of the headmaster. The other person is the new king who won first place in this year's freshman competition, Chaosblade. Everyone exclaimed in unison. Then they immediately began to talk about it. It's actually those two freaks. No wonder they're so powerful. Isn't that so? I heard that Tai Ta fought young Master Cheng to a draw in the library, that Changyang Shoten defeated Saint Ka Diyun. That battle was very intense. I watched it from below. Changyang Shoten is indeed very powerful. I heard that outside the library, Luo Jian, who was an intermediate saint, couldn't do anything to Changyang Shoten without using a saint weapon. In the end, he was even forced to take out his saint weapon. Without Liang Xiaola as a burden, Jianxin and Tai Ta's speed increased a lot. They quickly entered the third zone. When they first entered the third zone, it didn't seem any different from the second zone. However, as the two continued to advance, they gradually discovered the viciousness of the third zone. Compared to here, the second zone could be called heaven. In the third region, there were many kinds of poisonous insects in the jungle. Moreover, there were many swamps on the ground. If one was not careful, one would sink deep into them. Fortunately, these swamps seemed to be man-made and were not deep. Otherwise, if one accidentally fell into them, one would definitely die if there was no one to help them. Perhaps because of the environment, the third zone didn't have as many weeds as the second zone. It was very wide. Jian Chen and Tai Ta moved through the forest carefully. They were now covered in a layer of powder. The powder was a mixture of several types of plants, which could effectively prevent the bites of mosquitoes in the area. Changyang Shoten, you seem to be very familiar with the forest. Have you stayed here before? Why are you even more powerful than me? Tai Ta looked at the layer of green powder on him and asked. Jianxin chuckled, I've read a lot of books in the library, and there are quite a few records about this. That's why I know quite a bit about surviving in the forest. Oh, no wonder. Tai Ta seemed to have understood. At this moment, Jianxin's eyes narrowed slightly. He immediately became stern. At the same time, the ground began to tremble slightly as if an earthquake had occurred. However, Tai Ta was already on guard when Jianxin spoke. He already held the axe that was on his shoulder with both hands. Jianxin stared to the left with a rather stern gaze. He said, Tai Ta, be careful. I saw that we encountered a large magical beast this time. Tai Ta nodded firmly. He immediately became stern. After all, the magical beasts they encountered in the third zone were not Class 1 magical beasts. They were Class 2 magical beasts that were much stronger than Class 1 magical beasts. They were no weaker than great saints. Even though the attacks of the magical beasts here were not very powerful, they still did not dare to underestimate them with their current strength. Under the nervous gazes of the two, a huge magical beast finally appeared before their eyes. This magical beast was covered in fiery red fur. It was extremely large, 3 meters tall and 5 meters long. 2 snow-white fangs protruded from its mouth. The fangs were as thick as a fist and a meter long, and the tip of the fangs were extremely thin. It was obvious that the fangs possessed a very strong penetrative force. If it weren't for the fact that this magical beast's nose was extremely short, Jian Chen would have thought that he had encountered an animal that only existed in his previous world, an elephant. However, in terms of size, this magical beast was a full size larger than an elephant. Be careful, Tai. This is a fire cloud beast with relatively strong defense among Class 2 magical beasts. It can spit fire from its mouth. It's very difficult to deal with. Jianxin immediately said the name of the magical beast. Having read a large number of books in the library, he already knew many magical beasts. He also had a better understanding of the specialties of those magical beasts. Tai Ta nodded slightly and did not answer. He stared at the fire cloud beast vigilantly. He was ready to attack at any time. The huge fire cloud beast roared at the sky. It slowly approached Jianxin and Tai Ta with its thick hoofs. The ground shook violently with every step the fire cloud beast took. Jianxin's eyes flashed. He immediately called out, I'll attack it from the front. Tai Ta, you go around to its back and attack. With that, Jianxin pushed off the ground and leapt high into the air. He directly landed on the fire cloud beast's head. As soon as Jianxin moved, Tai Ta left where he was as well. He circled around the fire cloud beast and arrived behind it. Jianxin called out as he stood on the fire cloud beast's head. Saint Force quickly gathered on the metal rod in his hand before he suddenly stabbed it at the fire cloud beast's head. Ding! With a metallic sound, Xianxia's rod only left a shallow mark on the fire cloud beast's head. It was actually unable to break through its defenses. Xianxia's face changed slightly. Although he already knew that the fire cloud beast's defenses were very powerful, he never thought that it would be so abnormal. His full-powered attack was actually unable to break through its defenses. Ha! At the same time, Tai Ta leapt high into the air as well. He swung his axe at the fire cloud beasts but as hard as he could, but his situation was not much better than Xianxia's. Tai Ta's axe only managed to scratch the skin on the fire cloud beast, but it did not cause any damage to it at all. Their attacks had clearly angered the fire cloud beast. It roared at the sky before quickly swinging its head, sending Xianxia flying far away. Flying in the air, Xianxia quickly adjusted his body's condition. His feet tapped lightly on the trees on both sides to slow down the force of his fall. Finally, he landed firmly on a branch. After sending Xianxia flying, the fire cloud beast suddenly turned around and opened its mouth to bite at Tai Ta. Tai Ta leapt up and dodged the fire cloud beast's huge mouth. At the same time, he viciously swung his axe at the fire cloud beast's long teeth. Ding! Following the sound of metal clashing, the fire cloud beast's teeth were broken by Tai Ta's axe. However, after breaking the fire cloud beast's teeth, 5 nicks appeared on Tai Ta's axe. Roar! The fire cloud beast was enraged. It stomped its 4 hooves and charged at Tai Ta. A vicious light flashed through Tai Ta's eyes. He did not dodge at all when he saw the fire cloud beast charging at him. He tossed away the axe in his hand and used his hands to grab the 2 snow-white tusks of the fire cloud beast. Immediately, the 2 of them were in a stalemate. At that moment, Tai Ta seemed to have become a beast. He growled as he grabbed the fire cloud beast's tusks tightly. He was actually competing with it in terms of strength. Even though Tai Ta was born with great strength, he was just too small compared to the fire cloud beast. As a result, even though he was quite strong, he was still pushed back by the fire cloud beast. His feet had already left 2 deep marks in the ground. Arg! A sliver of madness flashed through Tai Ta's eyes. He roared at the sky as the veins on his arms bulged. His arms rapidly swelled in an instant, and he suddenly exerted force with his arms. Bang! With a crisp sound, the snow-white fangs of the fire cloud beast were broken by Tai Ta. The fire cloud beast cried out in agony from the intense pain. Tai Ta seemed to have become furious as well. He did not show any mercy. He held the tusks in his hand and used the tip of the tusks to stab the fire cloud beast's head. The other end of the tusks was extremely sharp, no weaker than a sharp weapon. Even so, the tusks only managed to pierce the fire cloud beast's skin, causing blood to spurt out. Seeing how Tai Ta had actually injured it with his fangs, the fire cloud beast's eyes immediately became bloodshot. It opened its gaping mouth at Tai Ta and roared furiously. A huge fire snake shot out from the fire cloud beast, burning towards Tai Ta. Immediately, the temperature in the surroundings began to rise at an unbelievable rate. Tai Ta's face changed drastically when he sensed the shocking heat wave from the fire snake. He fled in a hurry, but even so, he was unable to completely escape the fire snake's attack. His entire body was engulfed in flames. Xianxia paled in fright when he saw Tai Ta completely engulfed in flames. He immediately snapped off a lush branch beside him and kicked off the branch forcefully. He shot towards Tai Ta like a cannonball. Roar! The fire cloud beast let out a furious roar and walked with heavy steps towards Tai Ta, who was engulfed in flames. It then opened its bloody mouth again and bit towards Tai Ta. It was not afraid of the flames on Tai Ta's body at all. Just as the fire cloud beast's mouth was about to reach Tai Ta, Xianxia also arrived in front of Tai Ta. He waved his hands and used the lush branch in his hand to wrap around Tai Ta. Before the fire cloud beast's mouth could reach him, he forcefully pulled Tai Ta away and quickly retreated over 10 meters away from the fire cloud beast. Xianxia agilely removed the branch wrapped around Tai Ta. Then, he ignored the scorching flames on Tai Ta's body and reached his hands into the flames, tearing apart the wolf skin on Tai Ta's body. The flames on Taita's body were almost all caused by the fur on the wolf skin, so after removing the wolf skin, Taita immediately escaped from the flames, revealing the tattered school uniform underneath. Chapter 42. Taita, are you all right? Xianxia asked with concern. Taita shook his head and let out a long sigh. He said in a muffled voice, I'm fine. It's just that I'm very hot. It's so hot that I feel terrible. That's good. Xianxia immediately let out a sigh of relief. He had been really worried that something would happen to Taita when he saw him surrounded by raging fire. At this moment, Xianxia's eyes suddenly narrowed. He turned his head slightly and glanced at a certain spot in the dense foliage behind him. A gleam of light flashed through his eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up into an imperceptible smile. Boom, boom, boom. The ground trembled slightly. The fire cloud beast approached Xianxia and Taita with heavy steps. The ground shook slightly with every step it took. Red flames constantly spat out from its mouth as if they would shoot out at any time. Taita stared at the approaching fire cloud beast solemnly and said in a deep voice, Changyang Shoten, this big guy's skin is very hard. How are we going to kill it? Xianxia also stared at the approaching fire cloud beast solemnly and said, the fire cloud beast is wrapped in a layer of very hard skin. Unless we're all saints, we can only break its skin with our weapons. Now it seems that we can only break through its eyes and attack its brain from there. As soon as Xianxia finished speaking, the fire cloud beast roared angrily. It opened its mouth and spat out a hot fire snake again. Xianxia and Taita hurriedly jumped away. Xianxia held the iron rod tightly in his right hand and shouted at Taita, Taita, go attract its attention. Don't worry. Leave it to me. Taita picked up a stone from the ground and threw it at the fire cloud beast. He then ran to the other side. The stone flew in the air and accurately hit the fire cloud beast, hitting its fangs that had been broken by Taita. The broken fangs seemed to be the pain of the fire cloud beast. The fire cloud beast's eyes immediately turned red and bloodshot. It kept spitting fire at Taita. Xianxia stared sharply at the fire cloud beast that had been attracted by Taita. He held the slightly bent iron rod tightly in his hand. Then he quickly ran from the side of the fire cloud beast to its head. Xianxia was extremely fast. As he ran, his feet did not touch the ground. He ran on the short grass of the grassland as if he was dancing in the air. In a short moment, Xianxia arrived below the fire cloud beast's head. He did not care about the intense heat coming from the fire snake. Xianxia jumped up high. When he was at the same height as the fire cloud beast's head, his right arm suddenly shook. He drove the iron rod towards the fire cloud beast's fist-sized eye. Although Xianxia was very fast, the fire cloud beast's reaction was not slow either. Just as the iron rod was about to reach its eye, it suddenly closed its eyes. Xianxia's eyes flashed. Success or failure depended on one move. At this moment he focused his mind. Under his powerful senses, he slightly adjusted the direction of the iron rod. The tip of the iron rod was originally aimed at the fire cloud beast's eye, but now it pierced through the gap between the fire cloud beast's eyelids. The iron rod easily pierced through the gap between the fire cloud beast's eyelids without any resistance. Immediately, bright red blood gushed out from the fire cloud beast's eye. Roar! The excruciating pain caused the fire cloud beast to let out a miserable scream. The sound shook the sky and spread far and wide in all directions. Xianxia's right arm exerted force again. The iron rod pierced deeper into the fire cloud beast's eye, trying to pierce its brain directly from the eye. The fire cloud beast's screams became more and more miserable. Then, its head shook quickly, trying to get rid of the iron rod in its eye. However, the iron rod had already penetrated its eye, so it was not so easy to get rid of it. Moreover, there was a person on the iron rod. The more it shook its head, the more intense the pain was. After shaking its head twice, the more intense the pain was, so the fire cloud beast did not dare to move its head at all. The fire cloud beast continued to scream. In the end, its huge body directly collapsed to the ground. It struggled painfully on the ground. Although the wound was not fatal to it, the piercing pain was something its brain could not endure. Seeing the fire cloud beast on the ground, Jianshan's eyes lit up with joy. He immediately yelled, "Tai Ta, use more force and pierce the iron rod deeper." This task was best left to Tai Ta, who was born with extraordinary strength. "Okay, I'm coming." Tai Ta ran over excitedly. He could see the dawn of victory now. Tai Ta quickly approached the fire cloud beast. He extended his hand and grabbed the iron rod in its eye. Then he forcefully pushed his right hand in. Immediately, the 1-meter-long iron rod completely entered the fire cloud beast's eye. Only a small part of his fist remained outside. Roar! The fire cloud beast let out a high-pitched scream. It was so loud that Jianshan and Tai Ta felt their eardrums ache. After the scream, the fire cloud beast seemed to have lost all its strength. Its huge body gently sobbed a few times on the ground before it stopped moving. Its other eye also slowly closed. Seeing that the fire cloud beast was finally dead, Jianshan and Tai Ta could not help but let out a sigh of relief. Although the fire cloud beast was not very powerful among Class 2 magical beasts, its defense was outstanding. It was very difficult to kill it. It's finally dead. This magical beast is so hard to deal with. It can even spit fire. It burned all my hair away. Tai Ta rubbed his big bald head with a gloomy expression. Jianshan chuckled. He looked at Tai Ta's tattered uniform that did not cover his body and said, "You should wear this." With that, Jianshan took out another wolf pelt from his spatial belt. Jianshan and Tai Ta had prepared many of these wolf pelts. There were still quite a few in his spatial belt. He planned to use them all to make clothes. After all, who knew how many battles they would have to go through in the forest? A single set of clothes was far from enough. Tai Ta did not hold back. He took the wolf pelt and quickly made a simple set of clothes. Afterwards, Jianshan and Tai Ta took out the monster core from the fire cloud beast's brain and set off on their journey once more. Just as Jianshan and Tai Ta disappeared into the woods, a red figure fell from a lush tree. It was a tall woman in fiery red clothes. She was about 30 years old. Although she was not very beautiful, she looked gentle and quiet. The woman looked at the fire cloud beast's corpse. There was still a trace of shock in her eyes. After taking a deep breath, the woman murmured in a low voice, "Tai Ta, Changyang Shoten, you two really live up to your reputation. You're actually so powerful. You're not even a saint, but you can kill a fire cloud beast that specializes in defense with only 2 ordinary iron weapons. This really surprises me. It seems that I have to report this to the Vice Dean." With that, the woman used her movement technique and quickly left. Not long after the woman left, another 5 youths with weapons in their hands arrived. The 5 youths' faces were dark, and it was impossible to see their faces. However, they were wearing tattered school uniforms. In their hands, 3 of them were holding great swords, 1 of them was holding a machete, and the last of them was a burly youth holding a sledgehammer. "From the sound of it, the roar just now should have come from here," said one of the young men with a huge sword. The young man with the machete nodded and said, "That's right. If that magical beast hasn't gone far, then it should be nearby." At this point, the young man's voice paused slightly. His eyes stared straight ahead and cried out in alarm, "Look, what is that?" As he spoke, the young man pointed his finger forward. Hearing that, everyone looked over. Sure enough, they saw a fiery red object the size of a small mountain lying on the ground. It looked very much like a magical beast. "Let's go take a look." Very soon, the 5 of them arrived in front of the magical beast. However, when they recognized it, their faces immediately became serious. An experienced young man crouched before the corpse of the fire cloud beast and dipped his hand in its blood. He said, "This is a fire cloud beast. Its defenses are very powerful, but its attacks aren't very powerful. However, its blood hasn't dried up yet and there's still some heat. Clearly, it died not too long ago. Looks like it was the one that roared just now." A young man with a huge sword looked around before looking in the direction that Jianshan and Tai Ta had left in. He said, "Let's go. Let's chase after them immediately and see just who killed this fire cloud beast." If they're strong enough, we can recruit them and hunt magical beasts together. If they're too weak. With that, the young man smiled evilly. Hearing that, the other 4 young men seemed to think of something. They all smiled evilly. Afterwards, the 5 of them quickly chased after Xianxia and Taita. Xianxia and Taita made their way through the forest carefully. Since they had to be wary of magical beasts that could appear at any time and the difficult swamps on the ground, the 2 of them did not move quickly. At this moment, Xianxia's ears trembled slightly. He immediately stopped Taita and said, "Be careful, someone's catching up from behind." Hearing this, Taita immediately stopped and turned his head to look behind him curiously. Very soon, the people behind them appeared before Xianxia and Taita. There were 5 of them in total. Due to their dark faces, Xianxia was unable to make out their appearances. However, the weapons in their hands all gave off powerful pulses of saint force. When the 5 young men discovered that it was only the 2 of them, a sliver of joy appeared in their eyes. They looked at each other, and as if they had agreed to this beforehand, they actually sped up and arrived before the 2 of them at the same time, surrounding them. Seeing this, Xianxia and Taita both had a bad feeling. "May I ask what the meaning of this is?" Xianxia asked with a deep voice. One of the young men waved the huge sword in his hand and smiled evilly. "What do we mean? What do you think we mean?" "Obediently hand over your space belts, and we will definitely not make things difficult for you. Otherwise, the large man with the hammer said with a cold smile. Taita's face suddenly changed when he heard that. He said furiously, "You want us to hand over our space belts? Don't even think about it." Taita now understood what the young men were trying to do. They were actually trying to rob them. Xianxia gently patted the space belt around his waist and sneered, "The space belt is right here. All the monster cores we've hunted are in there. Come and take them if you can." Even though they knew that the 5 of them were all saints, Xianxia and Taita showed no fear at all. Chapter 43. Xianxia and Taita both quickly dodged. In the past 2 days, Taita had experienced too many battles with magical beasts, so he had gradually grasped some fighting experience. While dodging, Taita swung the already chipped axe towards one of the people's thighs. But the opposite group was obviously not so easy to deal with. Just as Taita's axe was about to hit that person's thigh, a huge sword flew horizontally and collided with Taita's axe. Dang! With the sound of metal clashing, Taita's axe was immediately blocked. Even so, the terrifying force of the axe was unreservedly transmitted to the huge sword. Suddenly, the young man holding the huge sword felt his entire arm shake violently. The powerful force of the shock made the web between his thumb and forefinger feel faintly numb. The young man was shocked and quickly exclaimed, "Everyone be careful, his strength is very strong, it's best not to meet him head-on." Hearing the young man's warning, the other 2 people who were dealing with Taita immediately became cautious and tried to avoid the huge axe in Taita's hand. On the other side, Xianxia and the 2 young men holding huge swords were also fiercely fighting. Although the weapon in Xianxia's hand was only a rusty iron rod, but in addition to being inferior to Taita in terms of strength, Xianxia's overall strength was more than 1 level higher than Taita's. After contending with the opponent for a while with his flexible body, Xianxia caught a flaw in the opponent's defense. The iron rod in his hand pierced towards one of the people's thighs with lightning speed. Because they were all students of the same academy, Xianxia did not dare to kill them, only injuring them was enough. Xianxia's iron rod pierced out very quickly, and before the student had time to react, the iron rod had already pierced deeply into his thigh. Ah! The young man let out a scream. The pain made his face turn pale in an instant, and his forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. Hearing his companion scream, the other young man who was attacking Xianxia changed his expression slightly. He stopped attacking Xianxia and hurriedly supported his companion, asking, "Harry, are you all right?" Although the young man did not continue to attack Xianxia, Xianxia did not plan on letting him go. With a slight sway of his body, he arrived before the young man. All the saint force within him gathered in his hand before he directly slammed it towards the young man's chest. Xianxia's attack was extremely fast. By the time the young man reacted, Jianshan's hand had already silently approached him like a venomous snake, before mercilessly striking his chest. Bang! The young man was sent flying by Jianshan's nearly full-powered strike. While he was still in the air, he could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. After dealing with the two young men, Jianshan immediately went to support Tai Ta. Tai Ta had already fallen into a bitter battle. He had already endured many attacks from the three of them, and the wolf pelt he wore had already been cut into many places, causing blood to flow out. If it were not for the fact that Tai Ta's body was extremely tough and he was born with great strength, preventing the three of them from clashing with his axes, he probably would have been beaten to the ground by them already. With the addition of Jianshan, the pressure on Tai Ta immediately lessened. Jianshan's battle prowess was so great that it was not something a regular saint could compare to. After a few short clashes, the three young men had all been defeated by Jianshan. They were all injured to varying degrees, lying on the ground in pain. They had already lost the ability to escape. Jianshan looked at the wounds on Tai Ta and asked in concern, "Tai Ta, are you all right?" Tai Ta shook his head indifferently, "I'm fine. My body is very strong." With that, Tai Ta pointed at the 5 people lying on the ground in pain. "What should we do with them?" Hearing that, Jianshan thought for a moment before smiling strangely. He said, "Tai Ta, take off their space belts. Return them after you've taken out all the monster cores." The faces of the 5 people on the ground changed when they heard Jianshan's words. They paled slightly, and some of them even became furious. They had only obtained the monster cores after 2 days of life-or-death battles. There was only half a day left until the deadline of 3 days. If they lost the monster cores now, they definitely would not be able to complete the Academy's mission. Tai Ta snickered. Without any hesitation, he immediately did as Jianshan said. He removed all the space belts from the 5 of them while Jianshan stood there with the bloody rod in his hand. He stared at the 5 of them like a tiger watching its prey, preventing them from suddenly doing anything. The 5 youths originally planned to resist, but when they saw the bloody rod in Jianshan's hand, they immediately gave up and obediently let Tai Ta take off their belts. After taking off their belts, Tai Ta took out all the monster cores inside. He then casually threw the space belts beside them and began to count. After counting, the 5 of them had a total of 12 monster cores, all of which were rank 2 monster cores. Jianshan chuckled as he took out 6 monster cores and put them into his space belt. He said happily, "Tai Ta, we'll split these monster cores in half. The remaining 6 are yours." Alright. Iron Tower did not stand on ceremony. He excitedly put away the remaining 6 magic cores into his pouch. But when the 5 youths heard Tai Ta's name, their expressions changed and became very unsightly. There was probably no one in Kargath Academy who did not know Tai Ta's name. He was the dean's disciple. Although he had not yet become a saint, in the entire Kargath Academy, no one was willing to offend Tai Ta. At this moment, the 5 youths were full of regret. If they had known that one of the 2 was Tai Ta, they would not have come to rob the dean's disciple. But now, not only were the 5 of them robbed by Tai Ta, but they did not dare to retaliate because of Tai Ta's identity. They could only suffer in silence. After putting a few rank 2 monster cores into his space belt, the smile on Tai Ta's face became even more brilliant. He excitedly said, "Xianxia, you're still the best. You defeated the 5 of them so quickly. I Tai Ta have followed the right person." Jianshan smiled and said, "All right, let's continue on our way. I hope we can use this time to hunt some more magical beasts for our daily cultivation." Afterwards, Jianshan and Tai Ta did not even look at the 5 youths on the ground. They continued into the forest. When Jianshan and Tai Ta vanished from sight, one of the youths finally could not help but curse, "Fuck, we're really unlucky this time. We actually ran into the dean's disciple. And now, not only did we fail, but we've been robbed instead. And we don't even dare to get even with them. How unlucky." As soon as the youth finished speaking, the person with the sledgehammer said, "That's not necessarily the case. Don't forget that it's not just one person who robbed us. There's another person as well." Everyone's eyes lit up when they heard that. You're talking about Changyang Shoten? The tall and sturdy youth with the sledgehammer nodded and said, "That's right. Tai Ta has the backing of the dean, so we don't dare to touch him. But Changyang Shoten is different. But Changyang Shoten is very strong. Just now, all 5 of us were defeated by him. How can we beat him?" One of them said, "That's right. And most importantly, Changyang Shoten's attack speed is just too fast. I can't even dodge." The one who spoke was the youth who had been stabbed in the thigh by Jianshan. At this time, the person with the sledgehammer suddenly said, "Don't forget that Changyang Shoten has offended many people in the academy. Whether it's young Master Cheng or young Master Luo, they're all much stronger than us. As long as we find an opportunity to join forces with them, we'll be able to get our revenge sooner or later." In the blink of an eye, the sky had slowly darkened. The number of magical beasts in the 3rd area was obviously much lower than in the 2nd area. After half a day, Jianshan and Taida had only found a few magical beasts. Every time they killed a magical beast, Jianshan and Taida had to go through a tough battle. In the afternoon, they had only obtained a total of 7 Class 2 monster cores. Compared to the number in the 2nd area, this number was insignificant. However, when they thought about how the 5 saints had only obtained 12 monster cores in 2 days, they felt relieved. The 3rd area wasn't as peaceful as the 2nd area. Perhaps it was because Class 2 magical beasts were harder to kill and they were very few in number, so many people resorted to robbing. After Jianshan and Taita had encountered the 5 robbers, they had encountered 3 more groups of robbers. The smallest group had 4 people, while the largest group had 7 people. After a tough battle, Jianshan and Taita obtained the final victory. The other party's monster cores were also collected by Jianshan and Taita. However, what made Jianshan depressed was that there was a group of 4 that didn't have a single monster core. They had actually just been robbed. Even so, they still managed to plunder 33 Class 2 monster cores from the other 2 groups. At night, Jianshan and Taita sat in front of the fire roasting magical beast meat. There was a trace of fatigue on both of their faces. After half a day, they were more tired than fighting magical beasts for an entire day in the 2nd area. However, at this moment, Taita's school uniform had disappeared. His upper body was bare and his legs were bare. Only the important parts were covered with a piece of animal skin. He looked like a savage. However, Taita's naked body was covered with more than 10 scars of various sizes. Although they looked abnormally fierce, they were actually just superficial wounds. They didn't hurt Taita's muscles and bones. This strong physique made Jianshan jealous. Jianshan wasn't much better than Taita. Although his school uniform could barely be worn, there were still many wounds on it. However, the whole set of school uniform was completely dyed red with blood. It was so red that it was black. At this moment, faint sounds of fighting came from afar. Jianshan's hearing was very sharp. He immediately caught a very subtle sound. Chapter 44. Taita did not pay much attention to that. It's probably someone fighting with a magical beast. Jianshan agreed with that. However, with the memories of his past life, he had experienced things that Taita could not compare to. In this environment, even the slightest movement would alert Jianshan, especially after being robbed by his schoolmates during the day. Jianshan became more and more vigilant of his surroundings. Jianshan had seen far too many people fail miserably at a simple task. He did not want to become one of them. Jianshan tried his best to listen to the movements in the distance with the subtle sounds that his ears caught. However, his brows gradually furrowed. He could already tell that it was not someone fighting with a magical beast, but 2 groups of people fighting each other. Moreover, the sounds of fighting were rapidly approaching them. Jianshan looked at Taita and said, "Taita, it's not someone fighting with a magical beast. It's 2 groups of people fighting. Moreover, from the sounds of it, they're rapidly approaching us. Prepare yourself. There might be a battle later." Jianshan did not choose to change his position. With their strength, they could protect themselves here. Moreover, he was not someone who was afraid of trouble. Taita immediately became interested. He picked up the axe beside him and said, Someone's probably been robbed again. Changyang Shoten, do you think we should go and take a look? Jianchen sat down cross-legged in front of the fire with his iron rod in hand. He said, "No need. If nothing unexpected happens, they'll be able to reach us very quickly." Tai Ta sat down obediently. His face was extremely calm. Very soon, the sounds of fighting in the distance became louder and louder. Even Tai Ta could hear it clearly. Before long, several figures fled from the distance, running towards the fire that Jianchen and Tai Ta had lit. Behind them, black silhouettes kept flashing in the night sky. It was obvious that they were chasing after them. "My two friends, the people behind us are here to rob us of our magic cores. Not only are they extremely powerful, they also have more people than us. I hope that we can work together to fight them. Otherwise, the magic cores that we've painstakingly collected over the past 2 days will all end up in their pockets." Someone shouted from afar. Although Jianchen's group was only 2 people, if they joined, the strength of both sides would at least be equal. Hearing this voice, Jianchen frowned slightly. This voice gave him a familiar feeling as if he had heard it somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. Obviously, he didn't have a deep impression of it. Seeing that the 4 fleeing people were getting closer and closer to Jianchen, a figure suddenly shot out from behind at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of the 4 people, blocking their path. Then, he raised the huge sword in his hand and slashed at the person closest to him. The person fleeing at the front didn't back down either. He raised the saint weapon in his hand and fiercely slashed at the huge sword. Dang! The difference in strength between the two was clearly too great. With a low rumble, the person fleeing at the front was directly sent flying by the huge sword. In this short moment of delay, the pursuers had caught up with them. They surrounded the escaping people and attacked them fiercely. There were a total of 8 people chasing after them, and none of them were weak. The huge difference in numbers caused the escaping people to be suppressed by the other party. They bitterly held on, and it wouldn't be long before they were defeated. "Luo Jian, just you wait. I definitely won't let you go." An angry roar sounded from one of the fleeing people. The voice was clearly deep. Hearing this voice, Jianchen's face abruptly changed. Unlike before, this deep voice was extremely familiar to him. It was the voice of his big brother, Changyang Hu. "Big brother!" Jianchen called out. His voice was filled with surprise, and his eyes immediately sharpened. Without any hesitation, he charged towards the fleeing people with his metal rod. Seeing Jianchen's actions, Tai Ta followed closely behind Jianchen with his huge axe. After 3 days of interaction, Tai Ta seemed to have become completely obedient to Jianchen. Even Tai Ta probably didn't realize this himself. Actually, Tai Ta had been completely convinced by Jianchen's extraordinary battle prowess over the past 3 days, as well as his rich experience in surviving in the forest and his ability to think through problems. Jianchen's feet did not touch the ground as he quickly ran through the grass. He was extremely fast, approaching the 2 parties in the blink of an eye. The metal rod in his hand turned into an undetectable black streak in the night sky as he stabbed towards one of the people. From the person's figure and the direction of the voice, he had already recognized the person who was attacking. It was his big brother, Changyang Hu. Although everyone had noticed Jianchen and Tai Ta long ago and had been on guard at all times, Jianchen's speed was just too fast. There was no warning at all. Furthermore, everyone's vision was greatly affected by the sound of the night, so no one noticed the metal rod in Jianchen's hand that was only as thick as a finger. The tip of the metal rod stabbed deeply into the shoulder of the person attacking Changyang Hu, directly piercing through. Immediately, a miserable cry rang out in the dark night. Afterwards, before the injured person could react, Jianchen kicked him in the chest, sending him flying far away. Arg! At this moment, Tai Ta charged over as well. With a bellow, he raised his axe with both hands and swung it at one of the people. The person attacked by Tai Ta reacted quickly as well. He showed no fear at all when he saw the incoming axe. He directly raised his huge sword to receive it. Clang! With a great sound, Tai Ta's axe and the person's huge sword collided heavily. The 2 weapons separated as soon as they came in contact. Tai Ta stood where he was without moving at all, while the young man who had clashed with him was sent flying by the great force of the axe. Unless the difference in strength was too great, no one would be Tai Ta's opponent in a direct clash with the innate strength of Tai Ta. The young man who had clashed with Tai Ta suffered quite a bit from that single clash. However, another chip had appeared on Tai Ta's axe after the clash. Fortunately, the opponent was not very powerful. The energy contained within the saint weapon was still within the limits of the axe, or Tai Ta's axe probably would have been destroyed long ago. Arg! Tai Ta roared out furiously as he charged at the others with his axe again. Seeing this, two of the robbers immediately went to deal with Tai Ta. Clang! With the sound of metal clashing, a person who didn't know Tai Ta's background clashed with Tai Ta's weapon again. Immediately, without exception, he was sent flying by the powerful force of Tai Ta's axe, causing another chip to appear on Tai Ta's axe. Although Tai Ta's axe was very hard, it was far from comparable to a saint weapon. This was because every saint weapon contained powerful energy. By relying on a saint weapon, one could unleash an attack that far exceeded one's own strength. However, these people were obviously too weak. Almost all of them were at the early stage of the saint realm. Even if the saint weapon could increase their attack power, it was still very limited. With such a small gap in strength, Tai Ta could use his natural advantage to balance them out. Even so, the axe in Tai Ta's hand could not withstand too many collisions. Be careful. He's extremely strong. Don't clash with his axe, the person who had been sent flying hurriedly warned. With his companion's warning, the remaining young man immediately became cautious. He no longer clashed with Tai Ta's axe. Instead, he used the gaps in Tai Ta's attacks to attack. Xianxia did not stop after injuring a person with lightning-like speed. With a slight twist of his staff, he shot towards the other person who was fighting Changyang who like a ghost. Under the cover of the night, the iron rod that had been dyed red to the point that it was almost black was like a venomous snake hiding in the dark. It was extremely fast and silent as it wandered in the dark night sky, making it difficult for people to notice. Xianxia's staff stabbed out extremely quickly. Before the person fighting Changyang who could react, the tip of the staff had already pierced through his thigh. The person's expression suddenly changed. He let out a painful groan. His face was filled with pain, and he could not help but slow down his attacks. At this moment, Changyang who did not hold back at all. He swung his huge sword down and viciously chopped down on the young man's left arm. Immediately, the person let out a miserable cry. The bones in his right arm had been severed by Changyang Hu's sword. It drooped down powerlessly. Only the skin below the bones was still connected. Blood gushed out from his arm like a fountain. At this moment, a green light flashed in the night sky. A huge sword covered in a layer of green light slashed towards Xianxia at an extremely fast speed. Wind Saint Force. Seeing the huge sword covered in green light, Xianxia's expression became slightly more serious. Following that, he began to move in a profound manner. His body suddenly disappeared from where he was like a ghost. At the same time, the huge sword covered in green light slashed towards where Xianxia had been standing at an extremely fast speed. Xianxia stopped 3 meters away. Not far from where he had been standing, a person holding a huge sword stood there proudly. The person wore a tattered school uniform and was covered in blood. His face had already become dark and swarthy. It was impossible to recognize his appearance. Xianxia stared sharply at the person before him. He coldly snorted and said in a deep voice, "Luo Jian, I didn't think I'd meet you here." Hearing this, the young man was slightly surprised. The voice actually gave him a familiar feeling. He then carefully studied Xianxia. Although it was currently night, he was still able to clearly see Xianxia's appearance at such a close distance with the help of the bright moonlight in the sky. However, after 3 days of fighting in the forest and without a clear source of water, everyone's face was completely dark. It was impossible to recognize each other's appearance. However, when Changyang Hu, who was not far from Xianxia, heard Xianxia's voice, he was stunned at first. Then he looked at Xianxia in disbelief and cried out, "Your fourth brother." Changyang Hu's voice was filled with surprise and disbelief. He could not be more familiar with Xianxia's tone. A sliver of understanding appeared on Luo Jian's face when he heard that. He sneered, "No wonder I found your voice rather familiar. So you're Changyang Xiangtian. I never thought that you'd become a saint as well. You've really surprised me." A vicious light flashed through Luo Jian's eyes when he reached the end of his sentence. Chapter 45. All right then. Be careful, brother. Luo Jian has already reached mid-saint. With that, Changyang Hu immediately went to support the others. Although he was very surprised that Jianshan had appeared in the third zone, Changyang Hu understood that this was not the time to get to the bottom of things. With the addition of Jianshan and Tai Ta, Changyang Hu and the others who had originally been at a disadvantage were now on par with their opponents. And because of Tai Ta's existence, they even gained a slight advantage. The battle had reached a stalemate and no one could gain the upper hand in a short period of time. Jianshan smiled faintly as he looked at the dark-faced Luo Jian. "Luo Jian, looks like not only will your robbery fail today, the monster cores you're clamoring for will probably change owners." Luo Jian became furious when he heard that. A sharp light flashed through his eyes as he growled, "Changyang Shoten, you don't have the right to take away our monster cores." Jianshan looked at Luo Jian with a sliver of disdain. He said indifferently, "Then let's try. Let's see if I have the ability to take away your monster cores." With that, Jianshan did not waste any more words. With a sway of his body, he charged toward Luo Jian as quickly as he could. Using the cover of the night, the metal rod in his hand stabbed toward Luo Jian's chest like a venomous snake. A sliver of hidden killing intent flashed through Luo Jian's eyes. His huge sword suddenly flickered with azure light as he swung it toward Jianshan with an unstoppable force. Since Luo Jian possessed wind-attributed saint force and had reached mid-saint, he was much faster than the others. His attack was extremely fast, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Jianshan's expression remained the same as he stared at the huge sword that was heading towards him. He then shifted his body slightly, dodging the huge sword by a hair's breadth. The iron rod in his hand did not change its trajectory, directly stabbing towards Luo Jian's chest. Luo Jian's expression changed slightly. Jianshan's attack was extremely fast. At this critical moment, he did not have time to pull back his sword to block. However, his reaction was not slow either. He had already mobilized all of his wind-attributed saint force and controlled his body to rapidly retreat. At the same time, he did his best to pull back his sword. Luo Jian's retreat was extremely fast. When Jianshan's metal rod touched his clothes, Luo Jian had already escaped from Jianshan's attack range. At the same time, he pulled back his sword and gathered saint force in his hands. He swung his sword at Jianshan. Luo Jian's attack was extremely simple, but in Jianshan's eyes, it was just a random slash without any technique. Even so, Jianshan did not dare to underestimate Luo Jian's attack. Jianshan leaped up and dodged Luo Jian's sword. He then kicked off a nearby tree and leaped toward Luo Jian. With a slight tremble of his arm, Jianshan left behind a faint afterimage as he extended his arm at an extremely fast speed. The metal rod in his hand turned into a streak of black light, stabbing toward Luo Jian with lightning speed. It was impossible to see with the naked eye. Luo Jian only saw a blur before Jianshan's metal rod arrived in front of him. This time, Jianshan's sword was so fast that he did not even have time to react. He did not even have time to dodge. The tip of the metal rod had already stabbed into his chest. Luo Jian's expression suddenly changed. He stared at the metal rod that had already stabbed into his chest in shock. His eyes were filled with disbelief, despair, and fear. With the speed of the rod, he was unable to block it at all. He did not even have the ability to stop it because the rod was just too fast this time. It was so fast that even an intermediate saint with wind-attributed saint force like him could not react in time. If the rod had pierced Luo Jian's chest, he would have been heavily injured even if he did not die. However, what happened next exceeded everyone's expectations. Just as Jianshan's metal rod stabbed into Luo Jian's chest, it suddenly stopped and a strand of pure saint force surged into Luo Jian's body. Afterward, Jianshan pulled out the rod and somersaulted in the air to reduce the force of the charge. He flew over Luo Jian's head and landed firmly on the ground. The strand of pure saint force he had left in Luo Jian's body suddenly exploded as soon as the rod left Luo Jian's body. The ripples of energy wreaked havoc in Luo Jian's body, destroying his organs. Spurt! Luo Jian immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. The intense pain coming from his body made him, who rarely experienced such a feeling, involuntarily let out a miserable scream. He fell to the ground and rolled around in pain without caring about his image. Luo Jian's miserable cries were exceptionally miserable, immediately attracting the attention of everyone who was fighting. However, when their gazes landed on Luo Jian, who was rolling around in pain on the ground, apart from Tai Ta, everyone could not help but be stunned. From their eyes, there was still a sliver of deep shock, but there was even more disbelief. After dealing with Luo Jian, Xianxia did not plan on letting the group of people go. He charged into the circle with his rod. If he had not coincidentally encountered Changyang today, not only would all the monster cores in Changyang's hands have ended up in their hands, he would probably have been heavily injured as well. With the addition of Xianxia, the originally equal strength between the two sides was immediately broken. Although Xianxia's saint force was not as strong as everyone else's, his battle prowess was undoubtedly the strongest among them. In his previous life, Xianxia had become famous in the Jianghu with his unbreakable sword skills. Moreover, his sword skills had reached perfection, making it impossible for people to guard against. Therefore, his attacks were extremely fast, sometimes so fast that it was unimaginable. It was impossible for people to catch him with their eyes. Although Xianxia was currently using an iron rod and was unable to display his true strength, it was still not something these inexperienced students could compare with. Under his exquisite sword skills, the battle quickly ended. Until the end of the battle, no one had discovered that Xianxia was not using a saint weapon, but only an iron rod. After the battle, the few students who had snatched the monster cores were all lying on the ground with wounds on their bodies. There was a bloody hole in each of their bodies, and they looked at Xianxia with fear in their eyes. Looking at the 8 youths lying on the ground, although Changyang and the other 3 suffered injuries of varying degrees, their eyes revealed a victorious smile. The 3 youths who were with Changyang looked at Xianxia with admiration and gratitude. Changyang, I didn't expect you to have such a powerful 4th brother. You really surprised us. Yeah, Changyang, although I've heard that your 4th brother's strength is not bad, I didn't expect him to be so powerful. Even Luo Jian, a mid-level saint, was defeated by him. Speaking of which, it's all thanks to your 4th brother's help this time. Otherwise, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to keep the monster cores in our hands. The 3 youths were clearly on good terms with Changyang, and they all sighed with joy. At this moment, Xianxia came to Changyang's side and glanced at the wounds on his body. He asked with concern, "Brother, are your injuries serious?" Hearing this, Changyang shook his head indifferently. He was pleasantly surprised and looked at Xianxia happily. It's fine, it's fine. These are just some minor injuries. Don't forget that my saint force is of the earth attribute. My defense is much stronger than ordinary people's. Changyang paused and asked, "By the way, 4th brother, why did you come to the 3rd zone? I remember that you weren't a saint before we entered the forest. Also, when did you become so powerful that you could defeat Luo Jian?" Changyang asked curiously. Xianxia smiled, "Brother, I'll tell you about these things when we have time. Right now, let's deal with the matter at hand." Xianxia glanced at the students lying on the ground. "Brother, how do you plan on punishing these people?" Changyang thought for a moment. "4th brother, I'll leave it to you. If it weren't for you, all of our monster cores would have fallen into their hands." Xianxia smiled meaningfully. "Since that's the case, why should we be polite to them? Let's just plunder all the monster cores in their space belts." Xianxia's suggestion received everyone's approval. Afterwards, Changyang and the other 3 took off all the space belts under the resentful and angry gazes of Luo Jian's group before plundering all the monster cores inside. After a round of counting, the 8 of them had placed over 130 monster cores in their space belts. Even Xianxia was surprised by this number. Changyang exclaimed, I didn't expect them to have so many monster cores. It seems like they must have robbed a lot of people before. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for them to kill so many magical beasts in 3 days with their strength. Xianxia nodded in agreement. Brother, let's divide these monster cores into 6 parts. We'll each have one. That won't do. As soon as Xianxia finished speaking, a young man stood up and said, Changyang Shoten, it's all thanks to you and this brother that we were able to obtain these monster cores. We didn't contribute much, so you should keep these monster cores yourselves. Don't share them with us. The young man's words were quickly approved by the other two. Immediately, another person said, Oz is right. Changyang Shoten, if it weren't for you and this brother, we wouldn't have been able to keep our own monster cores, let alone defeat them. Now that we can protect our own monster cores from falling into their hands, we feel very satisfied. As for these monster cores, we won't take them. That's right. Changyang Shoten, it's all thanks to you and this brother that we were able to obtain so many monster cores. How can we have the nerve to share them? Xianxia's eyes flashed with a bright light. His gaze was fixed on the expressions of the 3 people. However, he could only see sincerity in their eyes. There wasn't the slightest hint of falsehood in them. Xianxia saw the expressions of the 3 people and it made Xianxia's impression of them a lot better. However, Xianxia couldn't help but admire his brother, Changyang Hu. He didn't expect him to be able to make friends with these 3 straightforward characters. Although Changyang Hu looked a little silly, the attentive Xianxia understood that Changyang Hu wasn't stupid. Chapter 46. Fourth brother is right. All of us have contributed to this matter. Now, let's do it according to fourth brother's method. Fourth brother and this brother will take half of these magic cores. The other half will be divided equally among us. Changyang Hu laughed. Xianxia was his younger brother. Even though they had the same father but different mothers, this did not affect their relationship at all. He would not be polite to Xianxia. Since Changyang Hu had said so, the other 3 could not refuse. They all accepted the monster cores excitedly. On average, the 4 of them each received a dozen monster cores, which made them very happy. This amount was equivalent to what they had obtained from hunting magical beasts in the past 3 days. Xianxia and the others did not plan to stay any longer. After changing positions, they started a new fire and continued to roast the meat. The 6 of them sat in a circle around the fire. Changyang Hu smiled. Brother, let me introduce you. These 3 are my best friends. They're Oz, Oba, and Dyer. Changyang Hu pointed at the 3 of them and said, Brother, Oz and Oba are twins. They look exactly the same. Once they wash the dirt off their faces, you won't be able to tell who's Oz and who's Oba. Xianxia smiled faintly as he greeted the 3 of them one by one. After chatting for a while, they gradually became familiar with each other. They even knew Tai Ta's name. At this moment, Changyang Hu became serious and said, Brother, I remember that you weren't a saint before we entered the forest. How did you appear in the 3rd zone now? And you're so powerful. You actually defeated Luo Jian, an intermediate saint with wind attribute saint force. Could it be that you've become a saint in the past 3 days? Changyang Hu's question was also what the other 3 were concerned about. As soon as they heard Changyang Hu's question, Dyer and Oba immediately focused their attention on Xianxia. Xianxia defeating Luo Jian was undoubtedly a huge shock to them. Although they had heard about Xianxia's extraordinary strength in the academy, it was far from exaggerated to such an extent. Xianxia smiled and handed the iron rod in his hand to Changyang Hu. Brother, take a look. If I become a saint, would I still need to use a weapon like this? Changyang Hu took the iron rod. With just one look, he could tell that it was a rusty iron rod that had been dyed black with blood. Psst. Changyang Hu's eyes widened as he stared at the rusty iron rod in disbelief. He was so shocked that he could not speak. He never would have thought that Xianxia could defeat Luo Jian with a rusty iron rod. If it had not happened right before his eyes, he would not have believed it even if he was beaten to death. At this moment, Dyer and Oba also looked at the iron rod in Changyang Hu's hand. After sizing it up, the 3 of them were also filled with disbelief and shock. They looked at Xianxia as if they were looking at a monster. Looking at their expressions, Jianshan chuckled and said, "With me and Tai Ta working together, the magical beasts in the second region are no longer a challenge to us. That's why Tai Ta and I came to the third region." Hearing this, Changyang Hu and the other three could not help but feel speechless. The magical beasts in the second region were first-rank magical beasts. Although they were relatively weak and did not have strong attack power, it was still very difficult for an ordinary saint to deal with them. However, Jianshan and Dyer had obviously not become saints yet, but they dared to say that the magical beasts in the second region were no longer a challenge to them. This made the four, including Changyang Hu, curse Jianshan and Dyer in their hearts. After a while, Changyang Hu and the others finally returned to their senses. Changyang Hu continued to ask, "Fourth brother, you're already so powerful before becoming a saint. I really don't know how powerful you'll become once you become a saint." Changyang Hu paused before continuing, "By the way, fourth brother, when do you think you'll become a saint?" Jianshan pondered for a moment before replying, "I've already reached the peak of the 10th layer of saint force. Once I leave the forest, I plan to break through to the saint realm." Changyang Hu gasped. He looked at Jianshan with surprise and shock. "Fourth brother, you're really too powerful. When you came to the academy a few months ago, you were only at 80% of saint force. I never thought that you'd reach the peak of the 10th layer of saint force so quickly." Hearing this, the three of them could not help but sigh in amazement. The way they looked at Jianshan had completely changed. Jianshan's cultivation speed was so fast and his strength was so unbelievably powerful. He was definitely a genius among geniuses. At this moment, the three of them had already decided that they had to be on good terms with Jianshan in the future. They definitely could not offend him. Jianshan smiled carelessly and said, "Big brother, I've noticed that there seem to be many people fighting over monster cores in the third region. What's going on?" Hearing this, Changyang Hu sighed. "I don't know who started this, but it said that on the second day, a group of people started stealing monster cores from other people in the third region by relying on their numbers. The stealing of monster cores in the third region was also caused by them. When this matter spread, all the students in the third region followed suit. They formed groups and began stealing monster cores. After all, not only are there not many Class 2 magical beasts, they're also extremely difficult to kill. Killing them only gives you a single monster core. Stealing monster cores is much easier than killing them, and if you're lucky, you can even steal multiple monster cores at once." So, now that things have developed to this point, all the students in the third district are fighting each other. Many of the students who are left behind, or those who are in small groups, are unable to protect the magic cores that they have painstakingly hunted for and have been snatched away by others. As a result, many of the injured students have left the forest in advance, and there are not many people left in the third district now. Don't the teachers hiding in the shadows just ignore it? Tai Ta could not help but ask. As long as it doesn't harm lives, or if we encounter a magical beast, the teachers hiding in the shadows won't appear. After all, the reason why we've been called to the forest to hunt magical beasts is actually a form of training for us. At the same time, the stealing of monster cores this time is a test of our strength and unity. After all, things like this happen everywhere on the continent. "We're just experiencing it early," said one of the Oba brothers. "Oh." Tai Ta came to a realization. Jianshan suddenly smiled strangely. He looked at Changyang Hu's group of four and said, "Since others can steal from us, why can't we take the initiative to steal from them? I wonder if you're willing to go all out." The eyes of Changyang Hu's group of four lit up when they heard Jianshan's words. "All right, let's do it. Changyang Shoten, I'll follow you." Dyer immediately stood up and stared at Changyang Xiangtian in excitement as he spoke in a heroic manner. "That's right. We weren't strong enough before, so we could only run away. But now that Changyang Shoten has joined us, even if we encounter a team with a mid-level saint, it's not impossible for us to win. Since that's the case, let's take advantage of this last night and do a good job." The Oba brothers were also in high spirits. "All right, fourth brother, I'll listen to you." Changyang Hu also expressed his opinion excitedly. As for Tai Ta, he had no objections. These days, Tai Ta had already followed Jianshan's decision. After that, everyone ate their fill. After some discussion, they decided to let the Oba brothers search for targets in the surroundings, while Jinshin's group of 4 stayed behind to wait for news. Bama and his 2 brothers came back very quickly. At the same time, they found a group of 5 people about 5 miles away. Jinshin's group immediately set off. Under the leadership of the Oba brothers, they advanced toward the target 5 miles away. When Jinshin's group arrived at the location, the 5 people had just filled in the blanks and were preparing to rest. They were caught off guard by Jinshin's group. Because the 5 of them were at the beginner's saint level, they were quickly defeated by Jinshin's group. However, there weren't many magic cores looted from them. There were only 20 or so magic cores. After taking the magic cores, Jinshin's group didn't make things difficult for them and immediately left. For the whole night, Jinshin's group didn't sleep. They were all looking for their target in the forest. There weren't many people left in the 3rd area. After half a night, Jinshin's group only found 3 groups of people. However, what made them laugh was that there was a group of people who had the same goal as them. They met halfway and started fighting without saying anything. There were 6 people in this group, the same number as Jinshin's group. Moreover, there were 2 intermediate saints among them. They were very powerful. However, the 2 intermediate saints were blocked by Jinshin and Taita. In the end, they were injured by Jinshin's group and obtained the final victory. From this group of people, Jinshin's group collected more than 150 magic cores. It seemed that many students' magic cores had been snatched away by the 6 of them. After going through 3 battles, apart from Jinshin, everyone was covered in wounds. Apart from Taita, who had thick skin, they couldn't continue fighting. Helpless, they could only find a secret place to pass the rest of the night peacefully. Although Jinshin and Taita were still unsatisfied and wanted to rob a few more people, Changyang, whose group of 4, couldn't fight anymore. At this moment, the 2 of them had to stay behind to protect them and prevent any unexpected situations. However, it had to be said that Jinshin's group had a bountiful harvest. Apart from the first group of people who only had around 20 magic cores, the other 2 groups had obtained around 70 and 150 magic cores respectively. In total, there were close to 260 magic cores. Looking at so many magic cores, Jinshin even suspected that the number of magic cores they had was already half of the total number of magic cores the students had killed in the 3rd area. The rest of the night passed peacefully. At dawn the next day, Jinshin's group set off for the outskirts of the forest. Changyang, whose group's wounds had already begun to slowly heal after applying some ointment. These ointment had been prepared by themselves when they received the space belts from the academy. Chapter 47. P.S. There was a sudden power outage at home, so I couldn't update last night. Please forgive me, but I'll update it today. Jinshin's group of 6 walked towards the outskirts of the forest unhurriedly. 3 days had already passed. If they could successfully protect these monster cores and walk out of the forest, then they would have completed their mission perfectly. Moreover, these monster cores would not be taken back by the academy. They would completely belong to them. Jinshin and the others were very cautious as they walked. This was the time when things could easily happen. Furthermore, after the battles last night, apart from him and Taita, who still maintained their fighting strength, Changyang, who and the others were all injured. They could not even use half of their usual strength. If they were attacked by someone powerful, then a fierce battle would be unavoidable. This was something that Jinshin did not want to see. Jinshin walked in front, with Taita at the back. The group moved forward in a straight line. The faint white barrier in the sky rippled from time to time, quickly spreading in the same direction. When the sun had just risen today, the barrier in the sky that enveloped the entire forest had undergone such a change, pointing out the exit for the students who had lost their way in the forest. Jinshin's mind was on high alert as he constantly paid attention to his surroundings. The 3rd zone was not as peaceful as the 2nd zone. Here, not only did they have to be on guard against the magical beasts that could appear at any time, they also had to be on guard against the students. Perhaps there were people waiting for them in some hidden bushes. Furthermore, the closer they were to the exit, the greater the danger factor. After all, the barrier in the sky had already pointed out the direction of the exit, and the students who were still in the forest were all moving in the same direction. This undoubtedly provided some convenience for the people waiting for them. A few hours later, Xianxia and Tai Ta were getting closer and closer to the exit of the third zone. The journey seemed rather peaceful, but they would come across the corpse of a magical beast every once in a while. In some places, there were even 2 or 3 magical beast corpses at the same time. After a few more hours of traveling, the group finally arrived at the exit of the third zone. They passed through the barrier very smoothly and arrived in the second zone. At this moment, everyone could not help but let out a sigh of relief. They all understood that the demon cores they were shouting about were safe. This was because once they left the third zone, regardless of whether or not they collected the 2 demon cores, the mission was considered to be over. There was simply no one who dared to try and steal anything here. Hee, I never thought the journey would be so peaceful. That's really beyond my expectations. Changyang, who smiled happily. His voice was tinged with excitement. Oba also happily said, "Yeah, I thought we'd be attacked on the way out. I never thought it would be so peaceful. That's really beyond my expectations." Daira reached out and touched the space belt on his waist. He smiled and said, "I reckon that the people who stole the monster cores in the third zone have all suffered some injuries. They don't have the energy to rob people on the way. Moreover, most of them are in the same situation as us. They only want to protect themselves. They're satisfied as long as they can leave the third zone safely. They don't have the energy to rob people on the way." "Yeah, that's right. It makes sense." Tai Ta nodded in agreement. Xianxia shook his head slightly and said, "It's not like what you think. In fact, there are still people lying in ambush along the way. It's just that you haven't noticed them. Those people lying in ambush might have seen that we have a large number of people and couldn't estimate our strength. They weren't sure if they could take us down, so they didn't make a move on us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to leave the third zone so safely." When they heard this, their expressions changed slightly. Changyang, who let out a long sigh. He said, "Fortunately, fourth brother told us to pretend that we were fine. Otherwise, we wouldn't be so lucky if those people knew that we were all injured." Oba and the other 2 nodded in agreement. They looked at Xianxia with a trace of admiration. "All right, let's hurry up and get out of here. Once we get back to the academy, you should recuperate well." The 6 of them continued to make their way to the first zone. As they got closer to the exit of the first zone, the number of academies in the surroundings gradually increased. Although there were definitely many people who gave up on the mission along the way, there were still over 1,000 people who entered the forest this time. Even if more than half of them gave up on the mission, there were still a few hundred people left. With just a few hundred people scattered across the vast forest, it was almost impossible for them to run into each other. As a result, not many people were able to meet in the forest. Xianxia looked around at the other academies who were making their way to the first zone like him. He noticed that most of the male students were half-naked and covered in wounds. However, without exception, all of them were in a sorry state. Their upper bodies were covered in mud, and it was impossible to distinguish their appearances from their unkempt faces. Only some of the girls were still wearing their school uniforms, but without exception, their school uniforms were dirty and full of cracks. They looked worse than beggars' clothes. Some of the places where the clothes didn't cover their bodies were covered by wide leaves. They looked extremely miserable. Among them, there were a few who were unable to walk due to the injuries on their legs. They were being supported by their companions as they made their way out of the forest step by step. Perhaps due to the large number of people in this area, there were no magical beasts coming in and out. It was relatively safe along the way. Soon, Xianxia's group passed through the first zone according to the direction indicated by the enchantment in the sky and finally walked out of the forest. Outside the enchantment, Vice President Bayan was wearing a white robe. He was standing there with his back straight. One step behind him, there were a few indifferent-looking academy teachers. Behind them, there was a large group of Kargath Academy students. The total number of students was close to 1,000. They were divided into 2 camps. The number of people in the right camp was several times more than the other camp. Although some of them were wearing school uniforms that were covered in mud, there were very few damaged areas. Overall, they seemed to be in good condition. The other group was in a more sorry state. Their school uniforms were tattered and stained with blood. Through the cracks on their school uniforms, one could vaguely see the scars on their bodies. The people in the left camp were only about 200 people. Without exception, all of them were in a sorry state. Most of them were wearing clothes made of tree bark or animal skin. Among them, there were quite a number of people who were half naked. However, at this moment, everyone who walked out of the forest was arranged by a teacher to gather with the people in the left camp. Afterwards, Xianxia's group sat on the grass and waited quietly. At this moment, he understood that the people in the left camp were all people who stayed in the forest for 3 days and only came out today. As for the people in the right camp, they were all people who left the forest within 3 days. According to the Academy's rules, regardless of whether they obtained 2 magic cores or not, the mission was considered a failure. Looking around, Xianxia discovered that the people in the same camp as him had a gloomy expression. There were also some people who were looking at others with deep anger in their eyes. It was as if their eyes were about to spit out flames. At this moment, Xianxia seemed to have sensed something. He looked back slightly and saw a person with a dark face wearing animal skin and being supported by 2 students who were dressed the same as him. The person was looking at him with a venomous gaze. His eyes were filled with raging anger and a strong killing intent. Xianxia looked the person up and down, and then a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. He had already recognized that person. It was Luo Jian. Although Xianxia knew that he had completely offended Luo Jian after what happened last night, Xianxia did not care about it. In terms of strength, he was not inferior to Luo Jian at all. Once he condensed a holy weapon and advanced to the Saint Realm, Luo Jian would be even less of a threat to him. In terms of family power, although Xianxia was not clear about the strength of Changyang Prefecture, from all aspects, the strength of Changyang Prefecture was obviously not weak. Although Luo Jian was the son of the head of the Luo family, a powerful force in the Forbidden City, in Xianxia's view, the Luo family would not come out to embarrass him for such a trivial matter. After all, Luo Jian was injured by him when he accepted the mission of the Academy. And at that time, Luo Jian attacked his elder brother and others first. Later, when all the people in the forest came out, the number of people in Xianxia's camp had increased to 300 or 400 people. At this time, Vice Principal Bai En came to the front of the crowd. His eyes swept over the group of students on the left who were in a sorry state. A smile appeared on his face as he said in a loud voice, "Very good, you really didn't disappoint me. I didn't expect that in this year's magical beast hunt, there would be more people who could stay in the forest for 3 days. Now, everyone maintained the current formation and set off towards the academy." Later, the whole team maintained 2 camps and moved quickly in the direction of the academy. When they passed by a small river, they washed their faces and continued to move forward. Soon, when they arrived at the academy, they found that a high platform had been built in the center of the playground from afar. They stopped in front of the high platform, and then Vice President Bai En and several teachers went straight to the high platform. The Vice President sat in the main seat and said in a flat tone, "The triennial magical beasts hunting competition is now over. According to the rules of the Academy, the prizes will be distributed immediately after the completion of the task. Now, students who have stayed in the forest for 3 days and have more than 2 magic cores, please come out." As soon as the Vice President finished speaking, more than 100 people came out of the crowd. Now, let's first count the first-level magic cores. Students who have hunted first-level magical beasts, please come to the stage and count the number, the Vice President continued. Chapter 48. Among the 100 or so people, most of them were at the Saint level and were active in the second region. When the people who paid the magic cores walked out, there were only 30 or so people left. This made the students who didn't know the situation in the third region feel very puzzled. Although the third region was full of magic beasts, they had low attack power. For a saint-level expert who had condensed a saint weapon, it might be impossible for them to deal with a magic beast alone, but as long as a few people work together, it wouldn't be too difficult to hunt a magic beast in the third region. It was definitely easier than killing a magic beast for a saint-level expert who hadn't reached the saint level. After all, a saint-level expert's saint weapon was very powerful and was far superior to those ordinary weapons. Logically speaking, the students in the third region should have a much higher chance of completing the mission than those in the second region. However, the result was actually like this. In the third region, only 30 or so people completed the mission. When the first student came in front of the teacher who paid the magic cores, he directly took out all the magic cores from his space belt and gently placed them on the table. This student only took out 3 magic cores. His gaze casually swept over the 3 rank 1 monster cores. The teacher in charge of the assessment, who was around 50 years old, nodded his head slightly and said, "Yes, not bad. You pass. What's your name?" "Teacher, I'm called Qing Yunfeng." The youth who paid the magic cores was very happy. Not bad already proved that the teacher was praising him. To be able to receive a teacher's praise was a great honor for him. The teacher picked up a pen and made a note on a piece of paper. Then he said, "Return the spatial belt to the academy and take your magic core. This is your badge of honor. You must keep it carefully." With that, the teacher took out a badge from under the table and handed it to the student. The student answered happily and carefully held the badge of honor with both hands. Then he walked down the stage with a heart full of excitement. Next. Subsequently, one after another, the students took the magic cores in their hands to the old man to be appraised. At the same time, it could be considered as making a record. The speed of the appraisal was very fast. In the blink of an eye, dozens of people had already passed. Among them, the person who obtained the least magic cores only had 2. The person who obtained the most magic cores even took out 8 rank 1 magic cores. This made the old man who was doing the appraisal a little surprised. At this moment, it was the turn of a handsome young man with an extraordinary aura to appraise the magic cores. The young man had a small scar on his forehead. It seemed that he had been injured not long ago in the forest. There was a trace of blood on the edge of the scar. The young man calmly walked in front of the old man and silently took off the space belt on his waist. Then, the magic cores were taken out one by the young man and placed on the table one by one. As the magic cores were taken out by the young man from the space belt, a total of 6 magic cores were placed on the table. However, the young man's actions didn't stop because of this. He continued to take out the magic cores one by one from the space belt in an unhurried manner. His expression was also very indifferent. It could be seen that this young man was a very steady person. When the young man took out 6 magic cores, the teacher in charge of the appraisal finally became spirited. A faint smile appeared on his old face and he nodded slightly. There was a trace of admiration in his eyes when he looked at the young man. Soon, the young man had taken out 10 magic cores from the space belt. At this moment, the expression of the old man in charge of the appraisal finally changed. He looked at the young man not with admiration, but with astonishment. It was definitely not an easy task for a person who wasn't even a saint to obtain 10 magic cores in a forest full of magic beasts. Furthermore, he didn't stop, which undoubtedly told everyone that he hadn't taken out all the magic cores in his space belt. Behind the young man, the students behind him were all stunned by the number of magic cores he took out. Thinking about how they had spent a lot of effort in the forest to obtain only 2 or 3 magic cores, this was already a very good result for them. Many of them even felt proud because of this. However, the number of magic cores the young man took out in one go was several times what they had obtained in 3 days. How could this not shock them? Having dealt with magic beasts many times, they deeply understood how difficult it was for them to kill magic beasts with their strength that wasn't even a saint. The young man didn't care about everyone's expressions, as if he didn't see them at all. His hands didn't stop moving as he continued to take out magic cores one after another from his space belt. Soon, there were 15 magic cores on the table, but the young man still didn't show any signs of stopping. His movements were still as calm as ever as he took out the magic cores from his space belt one by one with a very calm expression. At this time, All the teachers on the high platform were looking at the young man. Their faces were full of surprise and disbelief. He had killed more than 10 magical beasts in 3 days with the strength of a saint. If 5 or 6 people worked together, they might be able to do it. But if one person wanted to kill so many magical beasts in 3 days, it was simply impossible in the eyes of all the teachers, unless those magical beasts were seriously injured. Vice Principal Bai En faintly smiled as he sat on the platform. His name seems to be Mu Tian. He only joined the academy last year, and he's gone from the 8th layer of Saint Force to the peak of the 10th layer in just a year. That's quite impressive. It's even said that he tried to break through to Saint Force before. Although he failed in the end, I have to say that the Mu family has produced a good seedling this time. Vice Principal Bai En paused before looking at Changyang Shoten and Taita. He softly murmured, "I really look forward to what Changyang Shoten and Taita have obtained." It said that the two of them actually went to the 3rd zone to hunt Class 2 magic beasts on the last day. They're clearly not even saints, yet they were able to kill Class 2 magic beasts with just 2 metal weapons. Oh heavens, that's just unbelievable. If I hadn't seen them kill a perfectly fine Class 2 magic beast with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it at all. Looks like not only has the principal taken in a good disciple this time, but even the Changyang prefecture that has been silent for over 100 years will return to its former glory in the near future because of Changyang Shoten. When the young man took out a total of 23 Class 1 monster cores from his spatial belt, he finally stopped. He calmly looked at the old man in charge of the assessment and said, "Teacher, these are the monster cores I hunted." The old man glanced past the 23 magic cores and let out a long sigh. He looked at the young man in interest and asked, "What's your name?" "Mu Tian," the young man replied in an extremely indifferent tone. The old man's gaze gradually sharpened as he asked, "Mu Tian, did you obtain all these magic cores by yourself, or did you obtain them by hunting magic beasts with several people?" Mu Tian's expression did not change at all. He had already expected this. He said, "Teacher, I obtained all these magic cores by myself." The old man's gaze towards Mu Tian immediately changed with that. He glanced deeply at Mu Tian and his eyes were filled with admiration. Afterwards, he nodded with a smile. Good. Mu Tian, right? Very good. Your results are extremely outstanding. I hope you can continue to work hard in the future. The old man did not ask Mu Tian how he had obtained the monster cores. That was not important at all. What was important was that Mu Tian had worked hard to obtain them. After all, strength was everything on the Tianyuan continent. As long as he could emerge victorious in the end, no one would say anything even if he used underhanded methods. Mu Tian could not help but smile faintly when he heard the old man's words of praise. At this moment, the old man took out a sky blue belt and a badge. He passed them to Mu Tian and said, "Muten, this is the space belt and the badge that you kept here before. Take care of them." Mu Tian calmly received the spatial belt and the badge of honor. After storing the 20 over grade 1 monster cores into his own spatial belt, he walked off the stage. From the beginning to the end, Mu Tian's face did not reveal the slightest bit of pride or complacency. He had been calm the entire time. Xianxia's gaze followed Mu Tian until he walked off the platform. He had already committed Mu Tian's name to memory. His intuition told him that Mu Tian was anything but simple, and he was no ordinary person either. He would definitely achieve great things in the future. However, he did not know which path Mu Tian would take. Due to the matter of Mu Tian taking out over 20 magic cores at once, the magic cores taken out by the following students did not cause any more waves. Most of them took out at least 2 magic cores, and only a small portion took out more than 2. Other than Mu Tian, who obtained 23 magic cores, the others only obtained 8 magic cores at most. The speed of the examination was very fast. Very soon, it was Xianxia's turn. At this moment, the eyes of the vice principal and a few teachers immediately lit up. They stared at Xianxia closely, showing a very attentive expression. The vice principal Bai En, who was originally reclining on the chair, also sat up straight. His eyes carried a trace of expectation. Although he knew that Xianxia had killed quite a few magic beasts in the forest, he did not know what quite a few meant. Xianxia calmly walked in front of the old man in charge of inspecting the monster cores. He lowered his head slightly to look at the table that was about 2 meters long and revealed a troubled expression. After a moment of hesitation, he opened his mouth and said, "Teacher, is it possible to change to a bigger table?" Hearing Xianxia's words, the old man who was in charge of the examination was slightly stunned. He did not seem to understand. "What did you just say?" Xianxia revealed a trace of helplessness as he looked at the table that was not big to begin with. This was because the table was just too small. It could not fit all the magic cores that had almost filled up his space belt. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation, audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.